this video is not really a tutorial in the sort of strict sense of the word. It's more a quick look at some tips which I would just like to pass on to probably more likely to be beginners, for people just starting out with Affinity Photo. But even some more experienced users, and myself included, will sometimes forget that these items are there, and I personally think that it's just helpful just to point these things out occasionally. So the first thing I want to point out is what is known as the status bar. It is the bit that runs along the bottom of the image panel here, and it displays modifiers or keyboard shortcuts that can be used with certain tools. Now, whichever tool that you happen to be on, the modifiers will be different. So if I come to the move tool, for example, because at the moment it's on just on the hand tool and you can drag to pan the view. If I come to the move tool, let me take the padlock off of this layer. Because it had a padlock on, it couldn't be moved, so there were no modifiers. But now I've taken that padlock off, as you can see there's a whole host of different modifiers that you can do depending on what it is you want to do. But also, when you move the cursor over certain things, or you try and do certain things, the modifiers will change. If I move the cursor to the corner of this here, you can see that the modifiers have changed. So if you can't remember whether you need to hold down Control or Shift to resize in a certain way, just keep on the status bar down here, and hopefully it will give you the keyboard shortcuts that you need to do the task that you want to do. So that is the first tip. The second one is looking at the crop tool. If you come to the crop tool, now this is all in the pixel persona. A lot of these tips will be pretty much universal in all the personas, but at the moment I personally have this set on, you see up here, it's on thirds grid, which is these lines going across here, so that you can maybe crop an image to fit the rule of thirds. But there are other types of rules as when it comes to photography. You also have the golden spiral, this one here, and diagonals. Now, I personally always keep mine on thirds grid, but there is a keyboard shortcut to sort of go through them, so you don't have to keep moving up here to click, and that is just pressing the letter O, and it will cycle through those options while you're pressing the letter O. Now, assume you want to crop out this name here. Let me just move this in. And you don't want to, let me zoom in a second. You don't want to come right to the top, but you want to come quite close to the edge. Now, as you come nearer and nearer to the edge, at some point, if you have snapping on, the snapping will grab that and it will automatically take it to the edge. So you will have to remember to turn the snapping off, just so you can get close to an edge without actually having it being grabbed by the program and moved to the edge for you. So don't forget to turn the snapping off, but if you do that, you do have to remember to turn the snapping back on again. So let me just come off that tool for a second. So coming back to the crop tool, hopefully, yes, it will go back to full size. You can also, there is a tick box up here where you can darken the borders. Because if I move this in at the moment, the actual image behind stays the same down this edge here, which is not necessarily a major problem in some cases, but in some cases if you click on darken the borders, as you can see the whole of the outside has gone darker, but as I move this in, the image behind is also darker, so it is a bit easier to see exactly where you are going to be cropping, because the outside is darker than the inside. And let me just put that back to where it was. Now let me just take off the grid for a second. Okay. Now if you have an image where you want to straighten the horizon, you could try and rotate the image, and when the grid comes up, which it should do when you start rotating, yes, you get a grid come up, and you can try and line up the horizon with one of the grids. Let me just put that back where it was. But there is up here a button where it says straighten. And if you click on that, the cursor turns to a cross with a little spirit level on it. So all you need to do is click on one end of the horizon, hold down the left mouse key and drag it to the other end of the horizon. And I know that it's not here, but let's assume the horizon on this image was like this. When I let go of the button, it will automatically change the orientation of the picture so the horizon will be straight. So that is a much quicker way of straightening the horizon. I must admit I quite often forget that that is there, and I'm sure other people do as well. So let me put that back. Right, moving on to the next tip, which is about rulers and guidelines. Now you don't have to have on the top edge here and running down this left hand side you have rulers. Now you don't have to have them on there, you can turn them on and off quite easily. Just the keyboard shortcut for this is Control and R. So, and that's Command and R, I believe, in Mac. If I say Control, it's going to be Command, and if I say Alt, it's going to be Option on Macs. Okay. Yeah. So Control and R will turn those rulers on and off. Now, I personally almost never use the rulers, but I always leave them on because you really need to have these rulers here if you want to drag guidelines onto your image. I know you can set up guidelines via the menus up here, but it's a bit more long-winded. It is so much easier to come to a ruler. Let's come to the move tool for a second, and just click on the ruler and drag out a guideline. So for example, you wanted to line up some text, some extra text I may want to put down here, and I want to line it up with the bottom of the N here. So I could set up some text here and then move it to the guideline, and especially with the snapping on, it will snap to the guideline. But even if the snapping isn't on, you have a visual aid to use those guidelines. So you can drag one out from the left hand side for the verticals, and if you want a horizontal guideline, you just click and drag one out from the top ruler. So that is the guidelines, and if you don't want them anymore, and these won't be saved. If you save the image as a JPEG, export it, they won't be added in the exporting. But if you don't want them anymore, just click and drag them back to the rulers. So that is why I leave the rulers there personally. If you do use the rulers but you don't want the actual settings they're on, I believe these might be set to pixels at the moment. You can change them. You need to be either on the hand view tool up here, so it's got units, pixels, and you can change that to points, inches, feet, yards. So let me change it to centimeters. So they've now changed to centimeters. So you can do that from the view tool or from the zoom tool down here at the bottom, and you can see it still has the units, so you could then change it to inches. So that is the quick look at the rulers and grids. So let me come over to this image here. Now if I click on the little arrow underneath this tool here, as we all know, there's a selection of various shapes that you can draw out onto your document. So let me go with, say, the star tool, and once you've selected the star tool, let's change the fill of this to white. And then we just move it like this. Now most people, well, especially beginners, will probably just stick with the shape they've selected and assume that is all that they can do with it. But you have to remember to look up here along the top here where you get various options. So let me just quickly draw another shape so we get a different option. Let's go with the cog, and I will draw a cog down here. Right, so as you can see with this cog here, you've got the teeth, inner radius, hole radius, tooth size, notch size, whereas with the star you have curved edge, points, inner radius, outer circle, inner circle. So all the different shapes will have different options. So say for example this star here is a 5-star pointed star, but you could change that and have an 11 pointed star or more, 18, or whatever you want. And then you could change the inner radius, which is the circle in the middle, and make alterations that way. The outer circle is to sort of make it into a flower shape. So if we have a look at the cog, we've got here 12 teeth at the moment, but you could have more or less, and very similar as the other one, you can change the size of the hole in the middle, the size of the teeth of the cog, and like that. You can carry on like that. So each shape has their own different variations that you can alter, so don't just stick with the shape that you get from the default settings. So that is that tip finished. Let me go back to this image here. Now the next tip I would say is, for me, is a very big thing, because if you want to zoom in and out on a picture, you can use the zoom tool, and once you have that, you can just keep clicking with your left mouse button to zoom in, or you can right click and then you can zoom out, or you can use the shortcut keys of Control and equal or Control and minus. You can also come to the navigator and zoom in and out that way. For me personally though, let me come off the zoom tool. For me personally, I prefer to use the wheel on my mouse to zoom in and out. I can just do that very easily, and for me it saves time. Now I don't think this is set up by default. I'm pretty certain it isn't. But so if you have a wheel mouse and you want to use that to zoom, what you would need to do is come to the edit menu, down to preferences, and then over to tools, and there we have use mouse wheel to zoom. You just need to put a tick into that and then close, and then you can use your wheel on your mouse to zoom in and out. A very good feature in my opinion. Right, and the last sort of set of tips I'm going to look at is keyboard shortcuts. Now there are quite a few set up in Affinity Photo, and for those people that are moving over from Photoshop or Elements or what have you, pretty much a lot of them are the same keyboard shortcut as they are in Photoshop. Like duplicate a layer, for example, is Control and J. Now you can set up your own keyboard shortcuts. I have done a video on this previously, but I'll just sort of reiterate it here. Let's say for example you have changed the colours of your foreground and background. Now they may have changed this in some updates since I first got to Affinity Photo, but initially Affinity Photo didn't have a keyboard shortcut to change your foreground and background colours back to black and white. In Photoshop I believe you just had to press D. Now I would imagine black and white is going to be your main go back to colours for everything, because you need black and white if you're going to be painting on masks and things like that. So if you have changed colours, you want to be able to get back to black and white quite easily, so having a keyboard shortcut to do that. So if I use my keyboard shortcut, now you see it's changed it back to black and white. So how do you change that? So what you need to do is come to the edit menu, down to preferences, and then the option of keyboard shortcuts. Now if you come down to, you've got this, you've got photo and then file. If you drop down the file menu and come right down to the bottom to miscellaneous, and there you can see that set fill to black and white. So you could set it to D if you're a Photoshop user and that's what you're used to. As far as I know, the D isn't used for anything else in Affinity Photo, but I personally have made mine Alt and X, mainly because the Alt key isn't used too much on its own as a modifier. So I just use Alt and X because they were quite close to each other. That works for me personally, but you may want to set it to D. Another one which might be quite handy to set up is set the fill to 50% grey, which again I've used the Alt key, I've made it Alt and 5. So if I want 50% grey quickly, I can just press Alt and 5. So there are many different keyboard shortcuts that you can set up, and if there are some Photoshop favorites that you like, you just need to find them and change them to the ones that you like. Some others that I would advise you changing or setting up, if you use them quite a bit especially, is the things like, where is it there? The library and the macro panel. I mean, I've set mine up for the library, I've set it up as Alt and L, and macro I've set it up as Alt and M. So I can bring up the library panel and the macro panel very quickly. And one other possible one you might want to set up is a bit further up here, is the glyph browser panel. Now if you use text quite a bit, and you want to use symbols and what have you from a font that aren't sort of so easily readable, accessible on the keyboard, you may want to use the glyph browser. So if I set mine up here, if I just click in this and hold down the Alt and the G and then close, if I now press Alt and G, it should open up the glyph browser. There we go. And if I press Alt and L and Alt and M, I then have the macro and library panels. So just pressing the Alt and L and Alt and M will shut them down again, and I'm just left with the glyph browser. So I've shut that down now. So basically that is the end of this little look at some tips, and hopefully some of them will be useful to you and some may not be so much, but hopefully it's been okay, and thank you for watching.